Hello, and welcome to the Victoria Nikkei Cultural Society Heritage Committee's virtual walking tour of the Esquimalt Gorge Park. My name is Michael Abe. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here along with Natsuki Abe, part of the Heritage. She chairs the Heritage Committee for the BNCS. And we also have technical support from Jason Yap, who is our work study student for Landscapes of Injustice. We're grateful to be on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, the Esquimalt and Songhees families, who continue to share their knowledge about the history of their lands and their cultural practices. I'd like to first point out these three Japanese Sakura trees that were donated by the Victoria Nikkei Cultural Center in 2017 to commemorate Japanese Canadian interned and dispersed during World War II. There are also 15 sakura trees along this main road, leading to the current Japanese garden. These 15 Japanese flowering cherry trees were donated by the Takata Japanese Garden Society in 1995. We begin our tour at the entrance. The word itself derived from entrance, and so it did in the early 1900s. The invention of the incandescent light bulb in the 1880s led to the boom in the production of these little glass vacuum balls with a glowing filament, and by 1897, Victoria was quite a modern city, with many of the better off homes lit by electricity. The new legislature building was illuminated on June 21st, 1897, in honor of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. And as you know, they are still lit every evening, all 3,330 of them. That year, the BC Electric Railway Company was formed and managed by Frank Bernard, who later became Premier of BC. The tram lines were formerly owned by Consolidated Railways, but a tragic accident the year before, in which a train with 142 people plunged off the Point Ellis Bridge, killing 55 people, and marked the end of a financially troubled operation. The main purpose of the BC Electric Railway Company was to promote their commodity, electricity. They built tram lines to transport people without needing horse and buggy and not having to own one of those newfangled horseless cars. By 1904, there was a boom in house construction along the Gorge Waterway, and there was an expansion of the streetcar from Esquimalt Road along the Gorge and Craigflower Roads. BC Electric bought 20 acres of land from the Hudson's Bay Company for a park. In 1905, they extended the tram line into the proposed park, and in a matter of months, they cleared 10 acres, and on July 26, 1905, Tramway Gorge Park was opened to great fanfare, with entertainment, concessions, strolling paths, bridges, picnic tables, and benches. So by the way, how big is 1 acre? It's about 1 football field or 16 tennis courts, maybe 60% of a soccer pitch, or a short par 3, depending on your liking. Tramway Gorge Park was a living, pulsating advertisement for the new industrial age, the electrical age. Tram riders disembarked at the loop at the end of the line with a giant sign reading Gorge Park outlined in electrical candles. There were strings and strings of bare bulbs and paper lanterns glowing throughout the park. The regular summer tram service ran 2 cars with a capacity of 100 riders every 20 minutes between the main juncture of Yates and Government and the Gorge Loop for a 5-cent fare. We still see vestiges of that loop in the park entrance. First, we'll go to the reversing falls. Because the Gorge waterway is connected to the ocean as an extension from the inner harbor, it is still influenced by the tides. Although the water further up is brackish, the tides flow in one direction when the tide comes in, and then the other when it goes out, thus the moniker reversing falls. Some of the native folklore of the gorge has been passed down in legend form. One of these appeared in the November 27, 1963 copy of the Victoria Times as a tale told by Elder Jimmy Fraser. The article was in response to a proposal to have a fountain featuring the legendary First Nations Princess Camosun at City Hall, which many of the Songhees band thought would right the injustice done to Camosun's Spirit Rock when it was partially blown away in 1960 by a boathouse owner claiming it impeded the passage of small craft under the Gorge Bridge. Camosun is the name of a Songhees princess who lived here many years ago. When Fort Victoria was established in 1843, the area was known as the land of Camosun. The princess, according to the Songhees, was a wise and prophetic woman who ruled in accordance with the democratic ways of her people. That is, through persuasion and advice. Many elders, like Jimmy, also claim all the gifts and amenities enjoyed by Victoria today are due to this princess. Here is one of Jimmy's legends about Camosun. Many years ago, Cals, spelled Kaals, or Hals as shown here, the transformer, arrived in Victoria and was so struck by the beauty and wisdom of the princess that he offered her anything she wanted. Victoria, then, Jimmy relates, was not as interesting a place as it is today. Only fir trees grew in the area, there was no harbor, and the climate was cold and damp most of the year. It was just a plain, miserable country. Camosun, with the welfare of her people in mind, asked Cals for trees which would clutch the sky, flowers to cover the rocks, a good harbor to protect the canoes of the tribe, and for milder and warmer winds. Cals promptly changed some of her people into trees, known today as Garry Oaks. He transformed others into flowers, such as blue camas and the Easter lily, and bade the Northwest Wind warrior spirit not to deal too harshly with the land of Camosun. He made the harbor and gorge inland waterway next. Cals then asked her what fish she liked most. The princess, after trying several species, settled for herring. He promised her that, henceforth, herring would come up the gorge every year, enough to provide for the wants of her people. And by the way, Lekwungen means a place to smoke herring. As a final act, Cals transformed the princess into a spirit rock, giving her the gorge as her abode. This was done to ensure Camosun that her spirit and the amenities that were given her people would live forever. So now we'll walk along the gorge waterway towards the area where the Tramway Park was located. For water lovers, the gorge was warm and inviting, and there was a change pavilion that could be used for a fee. It was called the Pay. A free change facility was located just beyond the gorge bridge where the reversing falls were, so it was, of course, called the Free. Imagine now this area alive with activity from the Victoria Day long weekend through to just past Labor Day. From 1906, a huge canvas sheet began showing outdoor movies. In 1909, a merry-go-round was added, and 2 years later, a dance pavilion with a fine sprung wooden floor was built. In 1913, a roller coaster called the Scenic Railway and a water slide, Shoot the Chute, was added, and even a roller rink in 1929. Circuses, vaudeville performances, and sideshows came and went. People enjoyed boating, picnics, fireworks, and the bandstand. Hot air balloons took off, and high diving acts were performed. In 1909, a local boat builder and entrepreneur, Zenkichi Nishimoto, built a 40-foot long by 10-foot wide Japanese pleasure boat, or yakata, that most Victorians called the sampan. The boat was berthed near the swimming area alongside a floating tea house waiting room where cherry blossoms and paper lanterns trimmed the eaves. Crossing a red lacquered bridge One could board the vessel adorned with beaded curtains and tables for tea, ice cream, and kindred refreshments. Bamboo, imitation wisteria, and banners bearing the Zenkichi Nishimoto name decorated the houseboat itself. Zenkichi ran his successful business from 1909 to 1920. For 10 cents, it would take visitors up the gorge to Crayflower Bridge and back whilst enjoying the scenery, refreshments, and entertainment from a small piano. More about that piano in a bit. Japanese businessman Yoshitaro Joe Kishida noticed the activity and saw an opportunity. Inspired by the 1894 World Expo in San Francisco and the popular Japanese tea garden, he approached Albert Goward, the manager of Tramway Company, and pitched him the idea of a Japanese tea garden to increase visitor draw. Joe and Hayato Harry Takata gathered together with 4 other business partners and raised $5,000 and were assigned 1 acre of land within the Tramway Park. They leased it for $50 a year that was later raised to $100. Joe Kishida sent for his father, Isaburo Kishida, a garden designer employed by the Yokohama Nursery in Japan. The 65-year-old Isaburo arrived by ship on April 19, 1907. They imported plants and bonsai trees from Japan, designed Japanese-style bridges over winding streams, and installed stone lanterns. The felling of trees, planting of shrubs, and creating fish ponds in the tea gardens was carried out by Japanese seal hunters wintering in Victoria Harbor, and by July 11, 1907, the Japanese tea garden opened, attended by 786 curious holidayers, and by the weekend, attendance grew to the thousands. It was a hit. It was a resounding success. The gardens were beautiful, the location was stunning, and critically, Kishida and Takata had a knack for anticipating Victorian sensibilities. Here is an excerpt from the Victoria Daily Colonist in 1907, just after the garden opened. Man and nature have gone hand in hand in the transformation of the gorge, from an unkept forest to a magnificent park. In the midst of all this charming scene is a miniature Japan transported from the Orient, enclosed by typical bamboo and board callings. Within are found many evidences of Japanese life. A Japanese pavilion where tea and cake from the empire of the Mikado is served to the curious and the adventurous. Curios from the Orient are on sale, and near at hand is a Japanese maze that affords rare amusement to the rashly daring who adventure within its gates. The author, after complimenting their design, introduced Kishida and Takata as 2 enterprising representatives of the land of the rising sun, the proprietors of this miniature kingdom. In reality, the tea gardens actually had more in common with North American amusement parks. Certainly, the garden played off the natural aesthetics of the gorge, but in the traditional style of Japanese gardens. While capitalizing on their expertise in Japanese culture, Takata and Kishida crafted the gardens to appeal to the contemporary sensibilities of leisure and recreation. Just after, the owners had good reason to navigate their social climate carefully. They lived in a city where, as historian Timothy Stanley describes, anti-Asian racism was a texture of life. Just after Takata and Kishida opened the tea gardens in 1907, anti-Asiatic race riots broke out along the Pacific Northwest. It was a time when many people held the deeply racist belief that Asiatics were unable to assimilate into Canadian society, even though, as we see, the 3rd generation Japanese Canadians intermarriage rate is over 95%. Japanese Canadians across the province were barred from professional occupations because they did not have the vote. Many local institutions practiced segregation. For example, Asians were not able to swim in the pool at Crystal Gardens. Politicians called for racial exclusion. Takata and Kishida likely had clients who believed that persons of Japanese descent did not have a place in Canada's future. Despite this, for the next 3.5 decades, the Japanese tea garden would open to the public on the Victoria Day long weekend and close on the September weekend following Labor Day, outlasting the Gorge amusement park by many years. The garden opened daily to meet the first tram in the morning and closing just before the last tram at midnight. Isaburo Kishida returned to Japan in 1910, but not before leaving his legacy of Japanese gardens in Victoria, including Frank Bernard, who commissioned Isaburo to create a Japanese garden nearby on his Clovelly estate. This garden no longer exists, but Jenny Butchart and Lord Dunsmuir both commissioned Japanese gardens from him, which are still enjoyed today. Joe Kishida returned to Japan around 1922, selling his share of the enterprise to Takata's younger brother, Kensuke. Kensuke came to Canada around 1903 to work in the fishing and logging community in Rivers Inlet. In 1918, he traveled back to Japan to wed Misuyo Miyake. In 1920, she gave birth to Toyo, the first of 5 children to be born at the garden with the assistance of a Japanese midwife. Harry Takata lived in the garden as a bachelor after his wife and son returned to Japan. So what's with this garden? Bring your imagination and let's take a look. So they got 1 acre. The tea gardens were very much Japanese in its landscape and planting, but there was no green tea and sushi served. The cuisine was strictly Canadian, including beverages, tea, coffee, milk, soft drinks, and cocoa. 2 large tables were reserved for church groups and societies out for annual picnics. Waiters wore white jackets and ties. Light lunches were prepared by a professional cook brought from Vancouver for the season. The tea house served traditional English fare. Poached eggs on toast was almost everyone's favorite item. Swimmers ordered the dish as 2 men in a boat. In the first years, bread was baked daily in a shed behind the tea house and delivered to regular customers in the Gorge area during the off seasons. Oversized snowshoes were worn during the blizzard of 1916. They did sell Japanese ice cream. You could bring your own picnic and for 5 cents get a kettle of hot water. Private dinner parties were held in an adjacent building equipped with a gramophone and a small dance floor. The tea house was used for storing the tables and chairs in the off season. The shoji doors could be slid shut if it was too breezy. Other outbuildings included a pantry, ice house, and boiler shed. The Japanese ball game was very popular, especially with the children. For 10 cents, you received 6 wooden balls, and you would roll them and try to get them in one of 9 red or black holes, each with a point value. Think of it like skee ball at your local county fair or exhibition. Points accumulated could be redeemed for prizes. The prizes ranged from pop guns to fans to the coveted Japanese dolls, tea sets, vases, and inlaid trays that sat on a shelf for the rare and lucky winners. All the prizes were of Japanese design and origin. Even the souvenir postcards of the garden were printed in Japan. You could accumulate your winning coupons for bigger prizes. There were 4 alleys allowing several customers at a time. Joe Kishida first ran the ball game, and when he left, Kensuke took over, earning the nickname King for that position. A former customer, Jack Frampton, recalled, "The wooden balls went smash bang against the board at the end and made a heck of a racket. Joe was a friendly fat fellow who was a great favorite with the kids. He would let us accumulate our tickets. One summer, we saved tickets until we had enough for one of the Japanese stunted pine trees, complete in a blue pot." Entering the arched torii gate, located just above the shoreline trail, fresh vistas of pine, maple, and wisteria drew the eye to lily pad ponds rimmed with rocks and plants. The ponds were furnished with goldfish swimming, stone lanterns, and irises. The ponds were bridges over streams, led to benches, tables, and tea pavilions among the forested landscape. Paths were bordered by rustic fencing of curved sticks and bamboo. A band stage entertained visitors. There was a high canopy of natural fir and red pines and maples imported from Japan. Oilcloth tables and wooden benches were under the wisteria or in one of the tea pavilions for picnickers. Bamboo planted in geometric patterns created a rustling green maze amidst rhododendrons, azaleas, and camellia. Wisteria vines climbed upwards over perugula, and electric lights stretched from tree to tree. There was a miniature bonsai garden featuring ancient bonsai trees and a water wheel fitted with bottle caps. On August 13th, 1925, a spectacular fire destroyed the bandstand and nearby concessions, and this dramatically marked the beginning of the end for the Tramway Gorge Park. A few years later, the Fielding's concession stand and merry-go-round were destroyed by fire. The scenic railway roller coaster was condemned and shut down in 1927, and the Shoot the Chute water slide was also closed. Several other factors contributed to the decline of the Gorge Park, mainly the Depression, the rise of the motor car, and growing pollution in the gorge. In 1933, the Gorge Bridge was being rebuilt, making it inconvenient for customers from Saanich. In 1939, the outdoor stage and Pei bathhouse were demolished. In the Japanese tea gardens, this was also felt, and they had to let go many of their workers with only the family to run it. Then came the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor and Hong Kong in December 1941. 1942, uprooting, internment, theft, vandalism, and destruction. The Esquimalt Tea Garden shows us that, in spite of this hostility, Japanese Canadian history cannot be reduced to a history of racism alone. For 35 years, the business thrived and became a foundation for life in Canada. The busy summers afforded the Takatas the opportunity of home ownership in Victoria, sending their children to school, and security in the future. This all ended when federal orders uprooted Japanese Canadians in 1942. After Pearl Harbor, the Takatas were among the 273 men, women, and children herded onto a CPR steamship in Victoria Harbor on April 22, 1942, bound for Hastings Park. After 5 months in the detainment center with unsanitary conditions, the Takata family was interned in Sandon, a town in a valley so narrow with mountains so high that at certain times of the year the sun doesn't reach the ground. The reunited family settled in Ontario after the war. Vandals destroyed the abandoned garden within weeks of their forced uprooting. Fences were smashed down and plants were ripped from the soil. Private belongings stored in the family home were stolen or scattered. An auction sale of the few valuables retrieved by the BC Electric Railway returned less than $500 to the Takata family. The story of the Esquimalt Tea Garden brings into view another kind of complicity: illegal actions like vandalism and theft. In new research by Landscapes of Injustice, we are learning about people operating outside the bounds of law. From there, the Takatas could only know about what happened to their property through letters to federal agents. They lived in uncertainty, unsure when they could return home or what they could return home to. Before they were uprooted in 1942, the Takatas made plans for their absence. They gave cherished plants to their neighbors and placed insurance on the property at the tea gardens. By all accounts, they planned to return. They leased the business to a local couple, Mr. and Mrs. Stansel, to act as caretakers. Despite disagreement with the Stansels, the fundamental responsibility for the protection of the tea gardens lay with the federal government. And it was because of this responsibility that federal officials cautiously reported to the Takatas the extent of destruction to their property. In early 1943, they wrote to Kensuke that the Stansels were quite unable to adequately protect his buildings and equipment. The federal agents had boarded up the premises, in some places using corrugated iron, but plants continued to be stolen from the gardens, and they feared thieves breaking and entering the various premises. Tasked with protecting the tea gardens, the Stansels and federal officials could barely fend off the vandals and thieves. After visiting the gorge a year later, in 1944, a federal agent reported that the vandalism had continued. He wrote, "The place is just a wreck. Practically everything of value has been removed, doors broken down, electric wires cut, and in many cases removed. In fact, the place has been ravished and wanton destruction has taken place all over the premises." Because of the actions of Victoria and Esquimalt residents, the Takatas lost all remaining value of their property. The tea garden structures were deemed fire hazards and eventually destroyed. After their forced uprooting and dispossession, the Takatas had no life or home to return to in Victoria, and the city had lost a vital institution. Unlike the US, where their property was not forcibly sold and they were allowed to return, in some cases even before the end of the war, Japanese Canadians were not allowed to return to the coast until 1949. They were given the choice to go east of the Rockies or back to Japan. The family decided to begin building their lives for a second time in Toronto. How did the Takata family respond to their dispossession? Only some of the Japanese Canadians' reactions to the news of their dispossession are recorded in the Federal Archive. Some wrote letters of protest and outrage. Others, even years after their property had sold, wrote to the government to explain what it meant to lose it all, to lose their investments, their future, their sense of belonging, their faith in Canadian citizenship. But the Takata's reactions didn't make it into the government records. Their letters are brief and elucidate little emotion. A rare instance was when Hayato wrote that he was perturbed to hear, 2 years after the fact, that his belongings had been sold by public auction without his consent. We get a glimpse into the inner turmoil of displacement and dispossession in the urgent letters of 18-year-old Toshie Takata, Kensuke's daughter, as she tried to preserve her piano from the process of dispossession. "I would like to know if my piano is still under your care. I need a piano very badly now that I have plenty of room to place it. If the cost of freight is too high, it seems rather foolish to have it shipped out here. If I'm able to sell that piano for at least $100, then with that much plus the cost of freight, I can practically buy a piano here. If you don't mind, will you let me know everything about the piano?" So from the 1950s to now, BC Electric Railway demolished all remaining buildings in 1944, and by 1947 the streetcars were gone. Only the caretaker's old house on Tillicum survived until the park was given free of charge to the municipality in 1955. In 1958, the Kinsman Club restored the grounds as a centennial project. The original woodland park, designed for picnickers arriving by streetcar, was deemed unsuited to the age of automobiles. Swings and teeter-totters were installed in the former amusement area. The adjacent slough created a wading pool, the only part of the waterway still used as a swimming hole. Trees were largely cleared away and replaced with lawn and asphalt. The gardens you see here today are new. In the past decade or so, the municipality of Esquimalt has been adding elements to the park. In 1995, Toyo Takata unveiled a stone marker. It reads, "In 1907, Joe Kishida and Harry Takata built the Japanese Garden and Teahouse on this site. It remained a popular attraction until 1942. Many longtime Victoria residents have fond memories of joyful visits to the garden, which occupied this space in more innocent times. This memorial was erected by the Takata Japanese Garden Society in 1995. Although Kinsman Gorge Park is far removed from the streetcar company's park, some elements still exist, including the circular entrance to the park off Tillicum Road and many original pine trees. Wooden crossbars and insulators that once carried power to the amusements area can be seen on two of the park's largest trees. Standing several hundred feet apart, they closely approximate the route of the scenic railway roller coaster. Shortly after, the original stream was uncovered and a Japanese bridge was built over it. A traditional Japanese wooden gate was built and dedicated in 2009. In 2010, another bridge and more Japanese-style plantings were added, as well as a large stone lantern, two small waterfalls, and a winding path. In 2012, to commemorate Esquimalt's centennial, it added a stream, pond, and bridge, and many new plants and features continue to be added since. Fast forward to 2018, where the public was asked to present proposals for the use of some of the money from the McLaughlin Amenity Funds from the Capital Regional District to the Township of Esquimalt to improve public amenities when a wastewater treatment plant was to be established at McLaughlin Point. As our members know, the Victoria Nikkei Cultural Society led the campaign to have a commemorative tea house be considered. Their hard work and dedication to this cause, along with research from landscapes, helped this proposal come to fruition. The Multipurpose Building was approved by Esquimalt Municipal Council on November 18, 2019, and is well on its way to becoming a reality. It will feature Japanese design elements and commemorate the Japanese-Canadian history of the park, namely the Takata Gardens. The building's purpose would be to serve the current needs of the community while educating the public about the history of sites that once belonged to marginalized groups. The VNCS, the Takata Family, and Landscapes of Injustice Research Collective continue to work with the Esquimalt Municipal Council and Parks and Recreation to ensure that the history of the gardens is told in an accurate and comprehensive fashion. Representatives from the VNCS and Landscapes were treated to a hard hat tour of the construction, with many thanks to Rick and Jeff from Esquimalt Parks and Recreation and Eric of Napit Construction. These photos were taken just 2 days ago. The building will feature a large water feature in the front of the building, with a water wall flowing into a reflecting pond. There will be 4 ways to enter the building, 2 over bridges. There will be a Japanese garden landscaping connecting to the current Japanese garden. This is the grand entrance, where the history of the Takata Garden and Teahouse will be told. The layout is well thought out, with a loading bay connected to a storage area on the main floor that connects to an elevator to the second floor and also has doors that open on the opposite side, leading to the servery, a small kitchen area. There will be a boardroom as well as 3 conference rooms, which can be configured to 2 or 1 large room, all with maximum glass windows. Ample washrooms will be available throughout, including some that are accessible from the outside. On the second floor, there will be a large area for events, seating up to 150 for rentals and events, with glass windows, balconies, storage area, a servery, and spectacular views of the Gorge Waterway and Japanese gardens. There will be be ample parking for 130 cars in a lot that will be beautifully landscaped. The hydro lines will all be buried underground and out of view. A bit of irony considering the prominence of them in the original Tramway Park. It was exciting to see the construction of the building, which will incorporate magnificent BC beams. They are hopeful, as are we, for a completion around Christmas of this year. The Takata family reunited briefly in Toronto before Harry returned to Japan to take care of the family business. Kensuke's family rebuilt their lives in Toronto. Happily, some of the seedlings that Kensuke had sent to friends for safekeeping before being evacuated were returned to him in Toronto. A cutting from a 1939 Japanese maple is still growing as a bonsai. Kensuke became a master of bonsai and returned to his hometown for a visit in 1979, where he died at the venerable age of 95 in the same Japanese house where he was born. One of his sons, Toyo Takata, became a Japanese Canadian community historian and stayed in touch with many friends and classmates in Victoria. He wrote Nikkei Legacy and helped build Takata Gardens at the Horticultural Center of the Pacific. He died at the age of 82 in 2002. Dillon Takata is a great-grandson of Kensuke Takata and several years ago returned to Victoria where he is a doctor. He and his wife Lisa got married in 2016 in those gardens and have been deeply involved in the Teahouse campaign. So what about the piano? Zenkichi ran his successful business from 1909 to 1920 with his sampan boat. As mentioned, for 10 cents, it would take visitors up the gorge and back whilst enjoying the scenery, refreshments, and entertainment from a small piano. When Nishimoto closed his operation to focus on his boat building and farming, he moved the piano to his home in the nearby Tilicum area. In 1938, when he moved to Vancouver, he gave the piano to the Takata family. On July 18, 1945, Toshie writes to Mrs. Stansel, "I would appreciate it very much if you would buy it from me. Much that I'd hate to sell it, but when I know of its owners, it gives a different feeling." It was sold to the Stansels on August 20th, 1945. Toshie wrote to the government from Toronto, "I would like to stress that the piano was sold owing to financial circumstances, otherwise it would have been preferably shipped here despite the high freight expenses. Miss Toshie Takata." So after we started the initiative for the revitalization of the tea house, the VNCS received this email. "My name is Stephen Lennon, and I have lived in Victoria all my life, as did my parents and grandparents. I read with interest the article in the Times Colonist on April 14th and believe that I have the piano that was at the gardens during the war. As a child, I was told that the caretakers were friends with my grandparents, Ernest and Muriel Stansel. They sold it to my grandparents when the original owners at the gardens were interned during the war. Over time, it came into my possession. I have had it for 41 years, while prior to this, my parents and grandparents had it in theirs. I would like to donate it to the society if there is interest in having it." So as we brainstorm ways to furnish the tea house structure with Japanese Canadian history and cultural elements, I think it would be incredibly powerful to have the piano and or its story included in the foyer to greet visitors or elsewhere in the building. And if you haven't seen the new documentary, Relocation, Internment of Japanese Canadians in World War II, produced by Sound Ventures and Canadian Geographic, please be sure to watch it. It tells this story so poignantly through the lens of 4 generations of the Takata family and the importance of commemorating the rich Japanese Canadian history of the area. We'll put that in the chat. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the following for their contributions to the content: Caitlin Finley, Yasmin Amataranga Railton, Rick Dakin, Jeff Byron of the municipality of Esquimalt Parks and Rec, Eric from Napit Construction, Lisa and Dillon Takata, Anne Lee and Gordon Switzer in their book Gateway to Promise, Canada's First Japanese Community, publications by Dennis Miniker and Thomas Bound, and of course, Jordan Stanger-Ross and the Landscapes of Injustice Research Collective, and the municipality of Esquimalt Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be happy. I'll welcome any questions. Thank you.
We had one question from Debbie Jiang. If they want to ask themselves on their mic, feel free, or otherwise.
Thank you very much. My question, Michael, and thank you for this wonderful presentation. When you were describing the new building being built, is there going to be a tea house or a coffee shop or something like that in the building?
Oh, we happen to have Rick, Rick and Sugi on the call. I wonder if they could unmute. I don't think it would. There will be food trucks in the lot, I believe. There is a, and there is a small kitchen. I don't believe that they will have like a permanent restaurant there.
That's correct, Michael. There's definitely room for catering and bringing tea in and having snacks and as well as the food trucks outside. But we're not going to offer a ongoing food service.
That being said, we can also have like tea ceremony group come in, because there is the facilities there, and they could do those, but not on a, I don't assume it on a regular basis. Does that help, Debbie?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Can you see me or hear me?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so I just wondered, because there's still the Takata Garden at the HCP, and this garden is also Takata Garden, like the two Takata Gardens. Are they related at all? Because I think the one at HCP had some funding from that Takata Garden Society way back, 30 years ago. I'm not sure.
So do you want to field that? I believe that it was going back and forth, and when I think the council at the time, it was more feasible that they went to the Horticulture Center of the Pacific. But I'll let Sugio comment on that if he has.
That's right. There were discussions between the Takata Garden Society and the township about expanding the Japanese garden and making it a formal Takata garden. The garden at Gorge Park is not called Takata Japanese Garden. Okay, that name is only applied to the Japanese garden at HCP. So it's just a Japanese garden, but obviously the roots are from the original Takata Teahouse and Garden. So now the negotiations went on for quite some time, and it also had to do with the discussion about a possible Japanese cultural center. So it was all tied up in the discussion, and that fell through. And I don't know the exact reasons why the funding from the Takata Garden Society eventually ended up being used at HCP. But anyway, that's what happened. Rick, were you involved in those discussions? That was when Dick Nakamura was the leader of the VNCS, and he was quite involved in those discussions and negotiations.
I wasn't involved in it, but yeah, I mean, we just want to continue to expand the Japanese gardens and in around the new building and make it better than it currently is, and try to make it as good as it was back in the past.
Yeah.
That's our goal.
Yeah. So even though I must commend the township of Esquimalt, in particular the Parks and Recreation Group, they have slowly expanded the garden, Japanese garden there, and it's come a long ways over the years, and it's to their credit that it's as nice and as progressive as it is now, and there's improvements will come with the building of the pavilion.
Yeah, absolutely. Is it too early, Rick, to unveil your donations plan, or is that too early?
It's a bit early. What
Okay.
I'd like to do is get it in front of our advisory committee in middle of May, and then on to council to make sure that everybody's on board with the plan. But there's lots of exciting ideas that are coming together, whether it's landscape, guide lights, lanterns, the Tory Gate, the reflection pond, cherry trees. So there's so much involved, and it's going to be a really special place as we start to gather, and build it in around the pavilion. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities that are coming forward, but I just want to make sure that the committee gets a chance to look at it first, and as well as the exhibit wall. We're going to do that at the same time, and then take it forward from there.
Great, thank you. And I think this Vivian has a question: will there be large plaques or anything else within the building that will tell the history of the Takata Gardens and Japanese Canadian history? And as mentioned, our group is we've struck a committee, and we'll be meeting on Thursday. What we will be talking about the interpretive panels that are going to be in the building. Yeah. So yeah, that's been definitely being looked at.
Yeah, and I can bring the draft to that meeting for the proposal for the gifting, and we can kind of talk about it in a smaller group, and I'd love to get your input, and then we go from there.
Yeah, for the audience who are taking in this excellent presentation by Mike, the Victorian Nikkei Cultural Society is partnering with the UVic Landscapes of Injustice in trying to get additional funding to do some to install some interpretive panels in the pavilion. And as Rick just said, Rick and Mike just said, we are in negotiations or discussions with the township about that. But there, as Rick has pointed out, there will be other opportunities for the public to get engaged in this outfitting of the building. More to come.
Yes. Oh, look at this with Nori Takata. Hello, son of Toyo. Oh, thank you very much for joining us. And I see Lisa's there, Lisa Takata. Do you want to come on? Maybe I think you had a little bit of an update about you've seen the piano, and also a little bit about Toyo, Toshie. She passed away, but not too recently. Not too fairly recently.
I'm coming to you from my car here. My my Japanese nanny is currently working with my daughter. She comes 2.5 days a week to immerse her in Japanese, and I have to make myself scarce. So, and there's no really good place to use the internet outside the house. So, thank goodness for Chago. Yeah, unfortunately, Toshie passed away. A couple years before the piano was rediscovered. So that would have been really amazing news, but all of the family was thrilled to hear about that recent discovery, and it would be extremely meaningful to the family, I think, to see it, well, first of all, hopefully repaired and refurbished. We did get a chance to take a look at it last summer, 2 summers ago. I can't remember when it was. We took our daughter there to this amazing property out in Langford, and there it was in the basement of a home, and unfortunately, I believe he had some cats in the family, or someone did. Anyways, they did a number on the exterior of the piano. We didn't get to play it, but surely it could use some tuning as well. But it would be really meaningful to have the provenance of the story, included with the showcasing of the piano at some location in the new multi-purpose building.
That would be
amazing. He's at work right now. He would be here if he could, but he's stuck working 9 days in a row at the hospital.
You said he just started on 9 days.
Yeah, he's gonna be grinding away for a little while.
Well, that documentary was amazing. Yeah, it was really, really great. I see that we've got the link up there on it. So if you haven't seen it, go to the chat, grab that, click on that link and save it. And watch.
I sent you some. I just emailed you some. Should have done this earlier.
Oh yeah, the photos.
Photos of Dillon. We were there last week having a picnic. We go there often, and Naya, she's almost 3. That's our daughter. She just runs like a crazy person through the gardens and loves learning about all the history. And I mean, she's a bit young to understand the history, but she knows that it's been there for a long time, and learning all the plant names and everything like that. So I sent you some photos if you want to, if you feel like screen sharing or anything like that.
Oh, yeah, I could do that. All right.
Thank you for everyone who has seen the documentary thus far. Dillon was really nervous. He's not for anyone who knows him personally, he's a very private and quiet person, and is not a fan of the spotlight. So it turns out he's a very good public speaker, though.
Very good. Great bedside manner. Yeah,
I think he's so good they cut a whole bunch of key people out of the documentary film.
I think there was a really good balance. Go back to the chat. Is Natsuki, is there anything up there while I get this?
No, just a lot of thank yous. Debbie shared some of the Toshie Takata's archival material. Some letters about the piano are there through the link. Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome. It's from the custodian files.
Dillon and Naya at 3 along the gorge. Also, I wanted to mention that if you haven't seen the landscapes for the community members or researchers, we have our new database up, and we did some launch events. But what we'll be doing is on the last Wednesday of each month, we'll be having a drop-in session. So if you have questions about how to use the database, or you've accessed it and you have questions about how to interpret the files, or if you found some really interesting things about your family that you want to share with us, with others, I'm hoping that that's what this evolves into, where it's a real community drop-in, and we start to have a lot of interaction. It'll be fairly informal. We'll poll the attendees at the beginning to see what kind of questions they'd like addressed, but we'll definitely go adapt each session to who's attending. So there's that information. We can put all that in the link in the chat. And just want to plug about our Heritage Committee. So Natsuki, thank you very much for creating this and being so interested in your heritage. We did a Obon historical virtual tour last summer. That was our first one. And we'll be doing that every summer. And so this year, hopefully, well, this year's still virtual, but hopefully we'll be doing them in person in the future. There's 152 persons of Japanese ancestry in Ross Bay. So if we cover off about 5, 6, 10, maybe it'll take about 15 years. But please join us. More information will be on our VNCS website, 2 o'clock on August 15th. And for these talks that we've been doing, we're open to suggestions. As we mentioned, Isaburo Kishida, he did a Japanese garden at the Hatley Castle grounds with Royal Roads University for James and Laura Dunsmuir. They're doing some renovations there as well, some developments on the greenhouse, but the gardens itself, beautiful, and lots of history there. There's a fair amount of history downtown of Victoria, but we would welcome any other suggestions, whether it's here or even up island a bit. All right. Well, thank you very much for attending today's presentation. Want to thank everyone who I thanked for in that list, and but mostly thank you for your interest and joining us here today. Thanks very much.